she comes down very hard on the Countess de Castiglione, arguing that this woman was sickened by the culture she lived in the way that Renee and Maxime and Sicard are all sickened by their culture at some level, and that she was a woman who could not even imagine herself outside defining herself as spectacle. You know, this is not about what I think, right? This is how I look. But it's both how I look as object and how I look as subject, and that's no small claim. So I think, I don't agree with Solomon Godot, frankly. I think it was, she came out in the 80s, I believe. It was a feminist moment where she probably thought the position with the greatest integrity would be to slam her for constituting herself continually as spectacle. But I think the photographs exceed that. You know, the very practice, the thought of what can a mistress do as an art form, for instance. Marie Bashkirtsev just told you that to be a painter wandering the streets was foreclosed, and this lady didn't paint. So what could she do? Well, this, I would say, is a corpus of work. And I give her more credit for taking the extremity of her position and manifesting it in a corpus of work. Okay? Yeah?
In what way do you think the internalization of her society and her photos is more profound than, like, today, than how we all internalize our society?
Well, first of all, I guess I would say one of the issues is that we vary greatly about our self-consciousness about what we've internalized. And that's why we turn to artists like Cindy Sherman and say, thank you for helping me see that way, while I just happen to like to read Cosmopolitan in my bath all the time, and I don't really want to think about why I do that, and how am I really defining my sexuality vis-a-vis a magazine. So in other words, I don't think it's about everybody then and everybody now. I think each era has some people who are really alert, smart, creative, and original about making manifest to us what our society is like. You know what I mean? Any other questions here? Okay, so bear these in mind relationally. Your paper is only 5 pages. You can't talk about these paintings in relation to the Castiglione, but it's to help you have critical thinking about it. Okay? And the Kayaba, and Luncheon on the Grass. But let me remind you, one of the other issues is that the Countess de Castiglione doesn't just isolate her eyes. She isolates her legs, and this is probably what really got Solomon Godot going. The fetishization of her own legs and feet. These are all Countess. And what's important about the fact that she showed us her legs? Can someone tell us?
She's not wearing stockings.
Not wearing stockings, that's one part. Yeah.
Just the whole culture of the ballet at that point.
Yeah, what about that culture of ballet?
About how I think at one point they cut up the skirt size so you could see more of the legs. And it was like men would view them while they performed, so then before or after the show they could go.
Great, so that was Riley, and remind me your name?
Jake.
Jake, and are you raising your hand with the pen there? No. Someone else. What about legs? I don't want to keep calling on you, Jake. Someone else. Yeah, and tell me your name.
Hugh.
Hugh, I love that name. Okay, go ahead.
I saw it's kind of like similar to the nude versus the naked.
Yeah, give me more.
And from that stocking.
Louder.
Stockings kind of make it marble, or so like the legs very similar to marble. So it's like Venuses, you're able to, like ballets that they have to form for a desire instead of like for you to act upon. And then in this case, there's no stocking, so.
Okay, you're focusing a lot on stockings, Hugh, but help me here. Sorry. women's legs in Paris? So first, before we get to the stocking, non-stocking, we have to say revealing your legs as a bourgeois or upper class woman was very transgressive. And the ballet, and you're absolutely right, that stockings and not stockings do work to idealize or distance or invite a specific kind of fleshly response. But let's first say, just showing her legs at all was scandalous and transgressive. And the reason ballet dancers could do it is because everyone knew ballet dancers were whores. And I mean it. So when your mom loves Degas calendars, or you grew up loving ballet class as an ultimate femininity, and you loved your little pink tutu when you were a child, you were absolutely romanticizing ballet's history, in which older women took younger women, younger children, to dance in the ballet and sold them backstage for the night. Okay? Dance rats. Okay, so I'm sorry this class, I really feel like this class is about robbing you of so many fantasies. I've heard that from some of you. It's like, I don't like reading Zola, it's really yucky, they're really creepy. Ugh. Well, first of all, welcome to life. Every epic. But let's get behind this calendar, or say, coffee mug commerce. You know, oh, I've got a lovely Degas ballerina on my mug. Yeah, how much did that cost you? Do you think you paid more for the mug than men paid for her that night? Okay. All right, so let's say the first thing about the Countess de Castiglione is she's showing herself like these prostitutes who show you their genitalia. To show you your legs was as shocking, maybe not as shocking, but really shocking. She's a countess. And she's obsessed with looking at her legs, probably because she goes to the ballet and is competing with Rigaud's Louis XIV and the ballerinas and wondering how cool her legs were. And this is where Solomon Godot is right. She seems to need to objectify herself to evaluate herself. Right? Do we need a photograph of our legs to know what we are? Apparently then. Okay? But of course the transgression must have been exciting. You aren't ever supposed to do this, but I'm getting a photographer to take pictures of my legs. It's like the Andrew Weiner problem. Oh, God. You gotta share. You gotta share to feel like I have any value, right? Can't stop sharing. So cut it out, all of you, any of you. I don't want to ever find your genitals online. Okay? Not one of you. So cut it out. Yeah.
So do we know if
Go ahead, Anya.
leg pictures are one of the ones that she's shared with her friends or her lovers?
Do we know which is which?
No, like, do we know if, like, because we know that some of the photos she shared,
Yeah.
do we know if the leg photos specifically are?
I don't know, and that's not saying we don't know. That's saying I have. The Metropolitan Museum of Art eventually had a great show on the Countess de Castiglione. She became worthy of an art show at the Met. And the catalog is helpful, and I use bits of it, but I can't say I've done a lot of the intense research I'd have to do to be able to answer you that. I may have known at one point, but I don't know. Okay, so there are photographs circulating like this, right? The legs of, I can't even read this here.
The opera.
The opera. The legs of the opera, thank you. And she's saying they get to do it, why can't I? At least privately. But remember, it's never fully private. She's got a male photographer doing this for her who's obviously willing to do anything she tells him. Which is pretty funny. I made this point about Degas ballerinas. Now you can think of these people accompanying the girls a little differently. one of my favorite photographs of the Tempest de Castiglione. Did you talk about this in section?
A tiny bit.
Yeah. This is whacked. Why is this so whacked? How's that for a professor's question? Alec?
Because there's some, this type of like morbid.
There is a morbid quality, sort of like my feet in the coffin kind of feeling, definitely. Yeah,
It's like that one painting.
louder.
That dead Jesus painting, I don't know what it's called, but it was like painted from that same.
You mean Manet's Toreador?
No,
In this class, are you
No,
talking about?
totally different.
Oh, okay, sorry, you have to tell me what century country we're in, but I believe you. Okay. Yeah,
it looks like she's taking a picture herself.
thank you. So what does that mean about where she and the photographer are?
In bed.
Huh?
In bed.
In bed. Very nice, but no, I don't think so. And remember, the camera is this box-like apparatus. So what did she have to do to have a photograph taken from her point of view of her legs? Anya?
Is there any chance that she took it herself?
Could he have set it up and had her?
Yeah.
Good question.
So I feel like that.
Okay, that's a good question. If she didn't take it herself, what was she doing? Huh?
Sharing her space.
Sharing her space? Leaning way back? I should not perform this. Okay, imagine me having my leg, not me, imagine yourself here, and your head somehow leaning far enough down that the man could put his big box camera. So what is he doing? Legs open, her head's down there, let's not go where Alec would go. And substituting his position for her head's position. How awkward. Now, I don't know what happened. I think, Anya, your question of whether he could have just had her hold the camera and just say click. But she had to move her head out of the way while he was focusing and getting things right. So either she had to lower her head or move her body to the side. That's another option instead of down. But the point is, this is an extraordinary usurpation of the photographer's position as her own. If I said again and again, she relies on him clicking the shutter even as she composes the picture. This one's extreme, right? And this one is really, I'm sure you've all, at least I have, all my life, been kind of obsessed with my feet in the bathtub, right? And it's over by that drain, floating there, and it starts to make you really conscious of how weird we are, the way we aren't. The way it's empty here, that we're looking, but we're not visible to ourselves the way our lower body is, and like we're half absent from our body and half present, and oh man, and I don't even do drugs or drink, okay? That sense of how weird is looking, right? And how weird is our lack of access and what we have to do to have access to what parts of our body are not visible to us. But one of the things that are visible to us in a bathtub, in a coffin, if we still aren't dead, big one, are the feet. And they're not very pretty feet either, I would say, but don't take that.
This is when she's older, right?
This is what she's
She airbrushed the original on her feet.
no.
Wait, what was her last name?
Oh, I don't remember. Do I have it pen? I'll get it for you, I don't remember. I can just Google it. Aren't you right? Go ahead, Google it.
Well, here it says 1895 is the end of her life, so you did.
Yeah, at the end, that's a ballpark. Okay. And she would have been a mistress probably in the 50s. So she lives a while. Okay. So as I say here, in 1895, at the end of her life, when Pearson, the photographer she's been relying on, was over 70, she nonetheless commissions work from him again, producing 2 identical booklets with 10 images which she named the series of roses. She gave each image a title appropriate to its mood. She called this portrait Rose Trémière, or hollyhock, which in France is associated with the grave. Thank you, old bald recluse. In one of the booklets, she disguised her girth, as you saw, I think, in section, with pinned down slivers of paper, indicating where the negative should be retouched. The Countess described her outfit on the cover as a dress of pompadour pink silk, pompadour referring to the 18th century and Marie Antoinette era, pandour of black gauze, real roses, and a curly blonde wig. A la Sherman, totally willing to say, got a wig on, this is me as a blonde. She looked like this. That's closer to what she actually looked like. But she could still perform herself as she had before, elaborately. But then put in the paper, which I would be able to do on every photo I want. Just a little paper to make appear thinner. So even in her 80s, man, and this is like Sojourner Truth still ordering 100, 200 photographs in her 80s to sell. In her 80s, she's still editing her photographs, constituting her image, but now creating a booklet that she sends to friends with an audience. She is a trip. I think she's marvelously sick and wonderful. Okay, so that's where I come down. All right, enough of the Countess. Let's get to Zola for a few minutes. Well, no, let's keep a picture up there while we do. My Zola is like just covered with great quotes. They're like so hard to decide between them. I want you to have that same sense of, oh, I couldn't decide. Okay? I want to point to one for a minute, and then I want to open up discussion. Renee near the end, when she realizes that Maxime and Sicard have both screwed her. And I have it on a page 266. I don't believe that. You don't need to look for it if you have this copy. It would do that. But the point is, it's late in the book. There's only like 50 pages left. Wonder. She starts to remember a moment with her sister. And she says, at recess, to stop the others making fun of her, she had pushed up those sleeves and turned down that collar. And the coral necklace and bracelet had looked prettier to her against the skin of her neck and arm. Was that the day that she had begun to strip herself naked? Her life unfolded before her. She experienced the slow onset of panic as swirling eddies of gold and flesh rose within her, first to her knees, then to her belly, and onto her lips. And now she could feel the current passing over her head, striking sharp, rapid blows against her skull. It was like rotten sap had drained the energy from her limbs, deformed her heart with the cancer of shameful loves, and planted sick and bestial whims in her brain. The sap had been absorbed through the soles of her feet, from the carpet of her caleche, and other carpets too, and from all the miles of silk and velvet she had walked on since her marriage. Other people must have left poisonous seeds in their footsteps, and now those seeds were sprouting in her blood and circulating her veins. She remembered her childhood very well when she was little and she had merely been inquisitive. I'll jump ahead. But all she saw now was her pink thighs, her pink hips, this strange woman of pink silk she beheld before her, whose skin of fine, closely woven fabric seemed made for the amours of puppets and dolls. This is what she had come to. She was a big doll, from whose torn chest stuffing leaked in a thin stream. Then confronted with the enormities of her life, her father's blood, that bourgeois blood that tormented her in times of crisis, bourgeois as propriety, right? Cried out in her and rebelled. She who had always trembled at the thought of hell, she should have lived her life within the dark austerity of the Hotel Bejo, her childhood. Who then had stripped her naked? In the dim blue surface of the mirror, she thought she saw the figures of Sicard and Maxime. Sicard, swarthy and sneering, had a color that resembled iron. A laugh that was torture to listen to, and skinny legs. What a will that man had. For 10 years she had watched him at work in the forge, enveloped in sparks of red-hot metal, his flesh singed, breathing hard, tapping steadily, lifting hammers, 20 times too heavy for him, heedless of the risk that he might be crushed. She understood him now. He seemed magnified by his superhuman effort, his scheming on a vast scale. Maxime's pretty blonde head appeared behind his father's stout shoulders. He wore the bright smile of a streetwalker and the blank stare of a whore who never lowered her eyes, and he parted his hair in the middle, revealing the whiteness of his cranium. He made fun of Sicard and deemed it bourgeois to go to so much trouble to earn money that he consumed with such admirable indolence. He was kept like a kept woman, right? His long, soft hands told of his vices. His hairless body struck the weary pose of a satiated woman. Vice flowed as easily as lukewarm water through this soft, spineless creature, utterly devoid of curiosity about evil. He was passive. Random quote. Not quite, but very much the character of the book. So let's talk about that, the character of the passage I just offered you. Yeah.
Very different in tone, like her opinions and then the
Yeah, very different from her thoughts about them at the beginning, when she aspired to become spectacle, right? And now she's sickened of it. What else? Lydia?
There's such an emphasis on being stripped naked and how over the course of the novel she has such a obsession with being clothed and going through them and then like the costuming and during the play within the play.
Right.
You've got this huge emphasis on this. How are you presented to others? And here she's
And not only is she being stripped in this passage, but she's being, it is the very costuming of her, the coral necklace, the bringing down of the bodice that makes you think it's the progression to her nakedness. So the sheer and key importance here of costume and nakedness and the complexity of that relationship. Yes, is it a cover? Is it a masquerade? Is it an achievement? Is it how you prove your wealth? And remember the kinds of creepy, oh, I realized the necklace he gave me, he had given to whom, or those kinds of exchanges of objects that are corruptly describing what it is to be kept. But now, ultimately, she's seeing that the perversity of a culture about costume was an eventual stripping of her in this passage, right? So this is great with Luncheon on the Grass. It's great with the Countess de Castiglione. And I think in a way, I think one of the reasons my sense was that there was novelty, but also that you really responded to Man at a Window, partly because it chastens this world. The creepy sexuality, the weird issues about power are not made as erotic in Man at the Window, despite Alex's attempt to make it obscene. okay? There is a way it's chastened. And this book is very much about perversity, obscenity, sexuality as having a power both inside the home but even manifest outside the home, right? So I do want you to remember not just to pick a passage as fact, but as tone, right? Be alert to the kind of extremity. And remember, Zola is a guy who believes in the degeneration of the French race. He's really anxious about it. So when he starts talking about Maxime, he is seeing what he calls, what he would deem the downfall of French masculinity. Not that he's embracing Saccard. Okay, the question of who could stand for a vital French masculinity is a question here. Okay, but that sense of just, this is really extreme language. Okay, for her to feel herself being kind of filled with gold. It's very resonant with the Statue of Liberty kinds of argument, the Tomorrow's Eve by B8A05724 that I'll be talking about later. Notice that it's costume, female flesh, but also these inert substances like gold, pearls, coral, that are standing for the corruption of this society, right? And to see yourself as a doll is to see yourself as hollow. It's also to see yourself as what Solomon Godot says the Countess can never get beyond, seeing herself as a doll, dress-up doll, okay? And I would be happy for you to take either position, Solomon Godot's or my reservations about such a strong argument that she capitulates entirely to her culture in those photos. I think that's defensible. So either way, but I point out that both Luncheon on the Grass and the Countess tonally are quite resonant with the novel in tone, right, in perversity. Yeah,
I would
Chase.
say like that quote particularly, maybe in the end as a whole, resonates more with me at least to Man at the Window, because Lunch on the Grass seems more like the beginning of the book, where it's more of a caricature of the society.
Which one seems more like the beginning of the book?
Lunch on the Grass.
Luncheon on the
It's
Grass.
more of a caricature of the society. It's like almost playful in a way, like the way
Yeah.
she describes Maxime and Saccard, and like it's like, oh, this is like such a lavish life, and like it has its
Kind of
problems.
fun.
Yeah, exactly. But
Kind
then
of
at
fun.
the end, it's way more sinister.
But why would, so Man at the Window, you see
I
as
see it
sinister.
way more because that gaze that she has at that woman, like it's like the unknown, like
Power he might wield over
the
her.
power and like this context of.
Well,
people
bear that
inside
in
the
mind
woman.
then. I think that's a very defensible argument, Chase. So bear that in mind that somehow you have to deal with tone. And here I am proposing that Kaya Butt, I mean, there's a reason I assign the Zola. I don't know that the visual art that I teach you vivifies adequately the sense of the perverse culture we're talking about. Perversely made literary here, but again, being about some, though I'm telling you it's a construction, nonetheless, it is a representation of that society and its perversity and its corruption, okay? So I think you can read Clark go on about capital and nakedness, etc., and still not quite have it be as vivid as after reading Zola about the stakes of being naked, or exchanged, or betrayed, or sold, or not sold, or pretending not to be sold when you have been sold. Okay? The Zola is very much about the way that the courtesan-prostitute divide or spectrum is mobile. Right? To be a courtesan is to pretend to be a valuable possession for these men. But it's a possession, right? And though they're not on the streets picking up whores when they're keeping a Renee in a fancy restaurant or other women in fancy apartments, that sense of being subject to that power and being bought. But the whole society is about a kind of exchange of money. I think the Zola helps vivify what Clark is trying to make you take seriously about 19th century Paris. Any questions? We have like 7 minutes here. Yeah, Ben.
So in the, sort of towards the end where she and Maxine get together in the little room and restaurant, so has she always wanted to put herself in the role as the courtesan? That's how I felt it, she flipped and became seen on the street to the fullest.
Well, I think you're right that the question of being the wife of a very powerful man versus being a courtesan. So I think that's really helpful to bring that up, Pam, in the sense that we tend to think of the courtesan, and maybe the Tim Clark chapter does this, I'd have to reread it, as a male fantasy. But in this society, Renee teaches you could be a female fantasy too. Not one that it turns out to be very comfortable. She is sickened by it pretty quickly because it's very vulnerable, right? And just being passed around as opposed to the status as wife of a powerful man. But yeah, I think there was a desire on her part to see what the position of courtesan was like. And also that sense of this incestual, long-time intimacy between Maxime and Renee. And Maxime, who's the boy underneath all the women's skirts, with whom women became very intimate. Yeah, so I would say that's worth thinking about, to what extent her desire is also bound to the ways in which the courtesan dominated that society as an ideal. Leo, do you have a question? Riley?
I think this is a more cultural question. Was it normal for like women to have or to be mistresses of other people's husbands even when they were married?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
Okay. Because it seemed kind of absurd to me that she like had a husband but she didn't want to be with her husband. It was like disgraceful.
Oh, no. Mistresses are mostly married, I would say. Yeah, not all. They're better off when they're married because when they're dumped, they have some support if their husband doesn't, dumped by their lovers. But you need to go back to the court of Louis XIV when Madame de Pompadour began as Jane Fish. Her name was Poisson Fish, Jane Fish. She becomes Madame de Pompadour as the lover of the king. And everyone assumed that the queen had to share, or may never share, her husband's bed infrequently, but that there were mistresses to all the powerful men, and they could definitely be married. Indeed, it could be a way a man would want to advance himself, is to have his wife become a mistress of a powerful man. Oh, yeah. All of you are going to have no respect for 19th century French culture. Walk out of here. Yeah.
I was confused when there was appearance of Sphinx.
Appearance of what?
Sphinx?
Spate?
Sphinx?
Sphinx.
The Egyptian
Oh,
mystical-
Sphinx. Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Sphinx.
I'm sorry.
And is that tied to Orientalism?
Sphinx
or
is entirely tied to Orientalism. Remind me how the Sphinx appears in the novel.
There's a hot house and there's like this dark statue of Sphinx.
Yeah.
And she's kind of like in the hot house. She's kind of like sexually aroused or something. And
Oh, yeah.
and there's also so I thought when she becomes kind of like this monster predator and Maxine because her prey, I thought Sphinx is kind of related to Renee, but then later there's also Louise who appears like Sphinx.
Louise is wild, huh?
Yeah, so
And Maxine's obsession with the main interest of Louise. How upsetting for Renee. The Sphinx, I mean, first of all, thank you for bringing up the hot house. And the sheer sense there are these tropical colonial, heated, wet spaces that the hothouse, by its very name, conjures. And that is often associated with other cultures.